Hey, Stephen Yondy here doing the junkyard crawl at Bernardston Auto Wrecking in Bernardstown, Massachusetts with a 1937 Buick Series 40 Special. Now in 1937 the Buick lineup consisted of the basic 40 Series Special, the 60 Series Century, the 80 Series Roadmaster, and at the very top the 90 Series Limited, which was a massive automobile. But again, down at the very bottom, the entry level, the Special we see right here, was a fairly humble car and yet pretty advanced for 1937, while a 37 Ford still had mechanical brakes, a beam front axle, and a transverse leaf spring, a torque tube. More on that in a second. Buick was quite a bit more advanced. In fact, we look here, we'll see that Buick had coil spring front suspension. Here's the coil spring right down here. And no beam axle here, no transverse leaf springs, and again, upper and lower control arms. But look at this forged steel upper control arm right here, which is actually connected to the kingpin, or the strut, the spindle, I guess you might say, right here. Kingpin's right down in here. No ball joints yet. That would come in the mid-50s. But the friction-style shock absorber is also the anchor point for the upper control arm. Kind of an interesting deal right there. Massive cast iron structure here. But again, the coil spring front suspension on this, knee action as they were known, was very much more better riding, I guess, than a Ford. Wouldn't bang you down the road. It actually absorbed bumps in a better way. And just beautiful styling here, the floating jet age, or I was pre-jet age, maybe streamline age headlight pods right there instead of the old buckets. And the front fender is 1937, first year for the suitcase style fender. We can see we call it that because the back of it here is blunt and squared off like a suitcase. And this one here being a base 40 Series Special, this one has the basic hubcaps, and yes indeed, here they are, they say Buick on them, 16-inch wheel, 600 by 16, but again, the Buick standard hubcap right there. And of course, the Buick Special, the term Special, would be the name used for the base cars for many, many years after 1937. Now, 1937 also the second year for what GM called the turret top, all steel roof. 1935, there will be a fabric insert in this. So that tells us this car is a 1936 or a 7. It's definitely a 37. But we go around to the back right here. I mentioned the torque tube that Ford had, and believe it or not, Buick actually also used a torque tube, as they did all the way till 1960 or maybe 61, the torque tube drive. We see it right here. But again, unlike a Ford, where there'd be a transverse leaf spring, Buick had coils in the back. You know, not a bad thing. And there's that torque tube feeding into the rear axle right up there. And the beauty of the torque tube is that it basically, it gets away from the need to have too many suspension members in the back, because the torque tube actually puts the propulsive force of the wheels into the back of the transmission and into the frame. So kind of an interesting way to go. And again, Buick used torque tubes in the back well through the 50s and the 60s, 61. But again, this one here is a very austere car. It's a stripper, big trunk, kind of a salesman special. Open this up, put all the moonshine you want in the back of this thing. Stand tall tail light here. Kind of a weird detail on this one we see. Here's a fuel door opening. It'll be a little cap right here for gasoline. On the other side, we can see where the fender's gone, but another fuel filler? Is it possible that this had two fuel fillers, or there's a left and a right, or who can say? Or maybe it's just the wrong parts, or bits have been hashed together, but it's kind of weird to see the opening on both sides. The fender's not here, so we can't see it that symmetrical and duplicated from side to side. Kind of weird. But again, here's a close-up of the body-on-frame construction. No unit construction for Buick until 1960 with the Special, the senior compact, but again, body, frame right here, they bolt together. Is that coil spring once again. And this one, like all Buicks, has a straight 8 engine. This is a radio delete car, which is interesting. We look inside here, we'll see that there's a structure in the middle of the glove, or the instrument panel, that has just a block-off plate. And look at the speedometer, 120 miles an hour? Are you kidding me? Now here's the thing. Buick did start making something called the Century in 1936. What the Century was essentially this car right here with a 320 cubic inch inline 8. This one here as a Special has a 248 cubic inch inline 8. But with that 320 cubes in this smaller car, the Century truly could break the Century mark, 100 miles per hour, and thus they called it the Century. But this one here does have a straight 8, but it's not what you might think. Let's take a peek here, and here it is. This is the inline 8. Now you got to remember that from 1931 through 1952, Buick had nothing but inline 8-cylinder engines. No 6s, no 4s. And again, as one of GM's more expensive line cars, the Buick, of course, should have a bigger engine. But the beauty of the straight 8 is that it's a very, very quiet, very stable engine, lots of torque. They don't vibrate. They're one of the most smooth running engines there is. There's rumors that you can put a nickel-on edge on the valve cover and it will not flip over. Now the cylinder head is missing here, but this would also be an overhead valve engine, which is to say not a flathead, would have intake and exhaust ports of fairly decent size and design, rocker arms, push rods. And again, Buick was ahead of the curve really in a straight 8 power plant from 1931 through 1953 or 52. Finally the V8 would arrive, the Fireball nail head in 1953 and bring Buick into the post-war era. But here's something kind of cool. This is a book right here by Jan Norby and Jim Dunn. This is a book, it was done back in the late 70s. But here we have the story of the Buick Straight 8. And there's a shot of it on the right, the Fireball 8, a later version right there from the 40s. But on the left it says here, to most people, the Buick engine was the heart of the Buick automobile. There was something majestic about it, standing bolt upright in the chassis and running the full length of the enormously long hood from right behind the radiator to within the barest necessity clearance of the firewall cowl. It was rock steady even when idling at 450 RPM or less, reminding one of a lazy giant marine engine. At the same time, it just reeked of power, the way a big steam locomotive did. And it's true. You know, again, this one here, a long, crazy engine. Now, the downside to a straight 8 is that crankshaft. It's like, what, almost 3 feet long. So you're not going to ask this thing to go 7,000 RPM. It's going to be whipping, it'll disintegrate. But, you know, at 4,000 RPM or below, bunches of torque, all kinds of smooth power. And in fact, Packard also banked on the straight 8 for its innocuous presence, if you will. It didn't rattle, didn't buzz, it was very quiet, and that's what you wanted in a Packard or an expensive car. And Buick had straight 8s from 31 onward. Now what we see on this one here is the 3-speed manual transmission. The starter would live right inside of here, but again, the manual transmission's all you got until you get into the late 40s when finally the automatics could be had, Dynaflows, etc. in 1950s. This is kind of cool right here. And this is a 1941 Buick catalog. A little different, but similar. One thing you could get in 41 and 42, most people don't realize, is twin carburation. Look at that. They called it compound carburation. Same basic engine. The 248 or the 320 could be had. And with the 2 carbs, the 320, 165 horsepower, the 248 would be 125 horsepower, whereas the standard 248 would be 115 with a single 2-barrel carb. And here it is right here, 2 carburetors on the side of that big straight 8 engine. Again, 1941 and 2 were the only 2 years for the compound carburation. Of course, we all know that 1942 was an abbreviated model year because, of course, Pearl Harbor happened and all of Detroit by February of 1942 converted to building tanks and planes and away from compound carbureted Buicks. But something we see on this is the turbolator style piston. We can see the pistons on these. They're not flat. We can see right there, it's got sort of a little bit of a dome to it, a crest, a void here, a bump there. And this is part of Buick's patented sort of, I guess they call it the turbolator, I believe it was. And the idea was that it would induce mixture motion and swirl, which is something that's the buzzword even to this day in Detroit. So again, here you have it, the 1931 first year for the Buick with the turbolator type pistons with those odd domes on them. And again, this one had side running boards right here. So a very basic austere car, pillar sedan, of course. It does have a cool little detail here, a clock in the glove compartment door. That was an extra cost add-on item. We see it right there. And again, this is the base model of a Buick for 1937, this 40 Series Special. Now, if you like this video, be sure to subscribe to the Steve Maggs YouTube channel. Share this video with your friends. Give us a thumbs up, a like, and be sure to ring the bell so you know when the next video hits, which is tomorrow morning.